Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's performance appraisal. I apologize for any of the technical difficulties we've had up to now. We have muted all the phone lines due to the large number of attendees. And should you have any questions, we will open up a Q&A at the end of the webinar, or feel free to email us at info@talentquest.com. So now I will turn the mic over to Kelly, who will be talking to us about pain-free performance appraisals.
Thank you, Dallas. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. This is kind of a topic that we discuss a lot here at TalentQuest. And amongst my personal clients, I hear feedback from one side of the spectrum all the way to the other. Some clients can't stand performance appraisals, don't want anything to do with them. And other clients love them and do them all the time. And then, of course, there's some in between. Before we get started, why don't we go ahead and give you all a little poll. Let me ask you what you think of performance appraisals. So from your personal perspective or your perspective at your organization, go ahead and click on the poll that you should see on your screen now and let us know how you feel about performance appraisals. Performance what? A big waste of time, somewhere in the middle, or very helpful and effective? And we'll give you just a moment to vote, and then we'll close and take a look at the responses. Okay. We have some votes more coming in, or we're close?
Done.
Okay. So we've got about 14% of you who say they are a big waste of time. Nobody admitted they didn't know what performance appraisals were. That's good. Somewhere in the middle, that's the majority of you. 49% say they're somewhere in the middle. And about 37% say they're helpful and effective. And I am with you on the somewhere in the middle. And I think it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on who's providing the feedback. It depends on what kind of a year you've had. And it just depends on how effectively it's delivered. And so our purpose today is to kind of try to give you some tools to make this process as effective as possible for yourself and for your direct reports. And if you're in the HR field, then pass these things along to your managers and your staff. Well, before we really dig into the meat, I can't do much without showing you a little Dilbert cartoon. So this one says, I got a text message from our boss. Keep up work. What does that mean? And Dilbert says, congratulations, you just got your annual performance review. So let's hope that, that's really not what's happening. But we do know that a lot of times, those performance reviews are kind of a formality. Here's a piece of paper, keep up the good work, and moving on. That's obviously not a very effective way to deliver feedback. It's not going to benefit your staff, your employees. People want to know what they're doing well, but they also want to know what they're not doing well at. And so providing them, having this as a platform to bring that stuff out on the table is only going to help further develop your employees. And along that line, let's talk about some of the values of performance appraisals. So clearly, for the individual, it's going to clarify expectations. Nobody wants to be going through a job and just wondering, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I should be doing? This is an opportunity to clarify those expectations. It's also going to provide direction for prioritizing those work-related activities. Joe may be thinking that he should be spending all his time on ABC, but in reality, we need him to spend more time on XYZ. So this is the great opportunity to bring that to his attention and help redirect him. Another nice thing is that it helps align an individual's efforts to the priorities of the company. We all have our own kind of personal agendas, but seeing what we do and how it contributes to the company and the company's goals can be very motivating. And of course, we want to recognize and reward those efforts and accomplishments. So many times people think they're doing a good job. What do I need to, just keep going. But rewarding and recognizing that effort goes a long way to keeping that employee engaged and helping them to continue to put forth that effort. This is also a place or a platform for career path guidance and promotion discussions, decisions. You know, where do you want to see yourself in a few years? What do we need to do to get you there? What kind of development tools are you not having access to? Let's talk about what we can do to help you grow. And now that's on the individual side. Value to the organization is pretty clear. You know, but it aligns employees' goals to the organizational goals and priorities. That alignment helps us make sure that we're all working toward the same objective. It's also going to help us identify gaps and help focus recruiting, selection, development, and planning strategies. So if we know that we're missing this core competency in all of our Division X, you know, then we know that we should focus on recruiting, finding people who will have a strong skill set in that area. And, you know, I hate to even mention this, but of course there's the legal liabilities issue, and it does serve that purpose as well. Most importantly, though, it's going to improve the overall productivity of the workforce, which is really what we're looking for. Most engaged employees who are your top producers are the ones who are getting clear feedback, both positive and negative, on a regular basis. Okay. Now I just want to kind of outline for you a standard performance appraisal. All of you have, you know, different forms, different content. Some of you do things differently than others, but let's just kind of put this in a general framework here for the purposes of today's discussion and talk about a performance appraisal comprising of achievement of business goals, development goals, ratings of relevant skills, traits, and abilities. These are your competencies. And then, of course, the written statements to support those ratings. Those written statements both need to support the stronger ratings as well as the places where someone needs to focus some areas of improvement. All right, so just for a little exercise here, I want to talk through, again, a typical rating scale. So let's just kind of all get on the same page here. A typical rating scale, this is an example. You may all use different descriptions, but we've got, generally speaking, a 1 to 5, and a 3 is the, you know, right in the middle, fully meeting the standard of a good, solid, dependable performance. In general, we expect most employees to score a fully, you know, meets expectations. Ratings other than that middle 3 score, meeting expectations, should require supporting commentary to justify those variances. And of course, you know, with the majority of us getting a middle rating, fewer should get the 2s and 4s, and even fewer the 1s and 5s. So use the full rating scale, but use it sparingly when you get to those. You know, we shouldn't have 80% of our population with 5s, because we all know that not everybody is a superstar. I have here a few slides that just talk kind of about in more detail, what does it mean to you to be a 1 versus a 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to give you this one slide and I'm going to give you the extremes, and then we're going to talk about why it's important to think through those ratings and use each one. So on the very bottom part of our scale here, a 1. This employee is failing to meet objectives. This employee's performance is causing negative feedback amongst coworkers, clients, and those in other departments. This employee is not motivated and meets few, if any, expectations. Unsatisfactory performance indicates a short-term performance plan and discussion regarding continuity in current position. Let's hope that if we have a 1 on our rating scale, if we have a 1 in our team, that there is some sort of development plan that's been put in place already, and that this isn't a surprise for them to get this 1 at the end of their annual performance review. Let's jump up now to the 5. So on the polar opposite side, we have an employee who is consistently contributing at an exceptional level and exceeds expectations. This employee is recognized as an expert in an area and is sought out for knowledge and advice. This employee is highly motivated and demonstrates unusual initiative requiring very little supervision. This employee demonstrates outstanding leadership traits, and they're generally recognized across the corporation as one who meets their objectives. So to say all that, what I want to show you next is this kind of our standard bell curve here. Here we picture the center of the scale being the 3. Here we've got a 4 and a 5, and then on the other side a 3 and a 2 and a 1. So you can see that probably what we're looking at is about 68% of our ratings across the board for our team, we're going to look at people being in the 3s. A smaller percentage falling into the 4s, and even smaller percentage falling into the 5s, and likewise on the other side. The point here is to illustrate that a 3 is a good rating, but please don't ignore the full rating scale. Read the descriptions that you have available to you, and make sure that you are making the right selection for that particular question or competency or goal for that individual. And of course, as we are filling out these forms and providing ratings, we have a lot of errors that come into play here. We've all done them, and we all have subconsciously or knowingly committed these errors. But the more that we know about them and the more that we understand and are aware of them, the less we will, hopefully, the less we'll use them. So we're going to talk through now a few of just kind of some typical rater errors. I'll explain to you what each one of them means, and then just give you some general awareness so that as you are rating your teams, you can keep these in mind and make sure you're not committing one of these errors. So we have a past performance error, biased rating error, high potential error, similar to me error, outside influence error, leniency error, central tendency error, recency error, halo effect error, horns effect error, and contrast error. Common errors that people make when filling out a rating scale. Our first one here is the leniency error. And as you can see in our expert illustration, we have a wimp. He does not want to deal with those awkward conversations by giving somebody a low rating. He's wimpy. He doesn't want to deal with that. He doesn't want to have a conversation that he's dreading. And basically, he thinks that if all his employees get good ratings, not only will he not have to deal with that awkward conversation, but it will reflect well on his skills as a manager and make him look less wimpy. Okay, here we have a central tendency error. So we're back looking at that bell curve. This bell curve is a little bit more condensed, and you can see that the standard deviation or the spread of the curve it's very narrow. So in this issue here, this comes into play when you're clumping or clustering all employees in the middle in an attempt to avoid any extremes. Going through the review and providing 3s for every single rating for all of our employees. Occasionally maybe a 4, maybe 1, 2, mostly 3s on everything. This is usually caused by a desire not to call attention to oneself or by a misapplied sense of democracy. Although 3 is a common rating, and we already talked about that, the majority of us will get 3s on most of our items that we're rating on. Don't be afraid to use the ends of the scale when appropriate, and make sure you read those definitions, understand what it's trying to capture, and that you're being fair when you're evaluating each individual item. Okay, we have the recency error. So this is failing to take into account the entire evaluation period and focusing on a recent performance episode positively or negatively. It's so easy for us to do this. I can barely remember what happened last week, let alone the past 12 months. For most of you, you are doing these every 12 months, so I can relate. I'm going to give a cheap little plug here for the Performance Journal in TalentQuest. This is the purpose of this fabulous little journal. You can access your own journal. You can access a journal for each one of your direct reports. And the idea here, picture this as your tickler file. As throughout the year, as your employee does good things, has areas for opportunity, of improvement, file that stuff away. Obviously, we should be giving that feedback as much as possible in the moment, but there are going to be times that you're not going to be able to do that, and by the time you get a chance to speak with the individual, you'll have forgotten about it. So put your journal to use, track things throughout the year, and then when it comes time for annual performance review time, you can go back and look at all of those things that you've added throughout the year for each one of your direct reports and refresh your memory on the events of the year. The worst thing we can do, is just, look, Bob's presentation last week was terrible, and now I'm going to give him terrible ratings on everything. But you know what? The last 10 months, he's been doing great. So that's our recency error. Okay, we've got the halo effect error. We've got a cute little angel here. It says, Christy's communication skills are so advanced that I end up giving her high ratings across the board. So here, we're letting one favored trait or work factor influence all other areas of performance, resulting in an unduly high overall performance rating. And this seems to often happen with communication or social skills. You kind of think like, they're so likable, they're so articulate, they're good at everything, and so they get high scores across the board. On the contrary, here we have the horns effect. So this is when we are allowing one unfavorable trait or work factor to overwhelm other more positive performance elements, resulting in an unfairly low overall performance rating. Here we've got some devil-like cartoon. This is Jonathan, and his chronic tardiness is so irritating to me that it's hard to remember what he does well. So, if there's that one thing that just gets under your skin and you can't see past it, that's a rater error. So be aware of that. Try to see the other things, in isolation. Okay, the contrast error. We've got an apple comparing it to an orange. Evaluating an employee in relation to another. So evaluations should be based on how well the employee performed in relation to his or her duties, goals, performance standards, actual performance compared to expected performance. Again, stick to the rating guidelines and consider each employee's specific goals. Oftentimes people think they have to kind of rank order their team and ensure that their ratings match accordingly. So Gordon is a stronger team member than Steve, so his ratings should all be higher. But are Gordon and Steve the same person? Are they performing the exact same role? Do they have the same goals? As you're evaluating your team, try to look at them as an individual as you go throughout those ratings and select those ratings. Okay, past performance error. Johan did such a poor job with customer service last year that it's hard to remember and recognize the improvements he's made. This is when we're rating on past performance rather than present performance. On the contrary, as you kind of see in this graph here, we used to have a star performer. She came in out of the gate and just did everything right, and everybody loved her. And you know what? Over time, it kind of deteriorated, but we still have that first taste in our mouth of this very strong performer. And so we're still giving her high marks. On the contrary, in this example here, when he did a very bad job last year and you worked really hard with him and you coached him and he's doing a lot better this year, make sure those ratings reflect that he is doing better. He's doing a good job now. So try not to let that past performance influence your current ratings. Okay, this is a biased rating error. And here we have Batman and the Joker. So these guys don't get along too well. And so because we don't really get along, I'm not going to rate them very well. So I don't get along well with Bruce, so I tend to rate him lower without even realizing it. It's allowing your personal feelings toward an employee to influence your rating. It's really easy to do. I totally understand that. I get it. But try to look at the individual's performance and their contribution and not think about them as a person. We are all so different, and we all have different walks of life and different perspectives. So really try to focus on the performance and the question at hand. High potential error. Kyle has been identified as a high potential employee, so therefore his ratings will all be high. Don't confuse potential with performance. Somebody could have, an exorbitant amount of potential. We feel that they could climb to the top of the ladder here, but that still requires a lot of development and training and exposure. And if they're in a new role because of, they did so well and we saw them as potential, we moved them up into a new role. Well, in this new role, there's going to be a learning curve, and just be reflective of that person's performance that year, not of what you think they can do. Okay, similar to me error, and here we have two peas in a pod. Dan and I are so similar and compatible, I'm probably more lenient with him as a result. So if you're, feeling of comfort and compatibility and, that, oh, that's just like me and I'm so great too, so you might just tend to rate that person a little bit more leniently. So be aware of that and really try to look at that particular item and that person's performance on that item in that year. Okay, the outside influence error. Don't base ratings on factors that are beyond the employee's ability to control, such as changes in the market. Wendy didn't make her sales goal last quarter, so I need to make sure her ratings reflect that. Well, that could have been some things there that were outside of her control, some things that were outside of her any ability that she had to influence it. Okay, so we've recapped a lot of different rater errors. But I hope that as you know a little bit about those now, that you'll be able to think of them as you are filling out your reviews and as you're training your staff to fill out their reviews. Once people are aware of them, you'll find that just the mere fact of being aware of them will help reduce them. So we've talked about the rating scale and some typical rater errors. What I'd like to discuss next is how to provide supporting statements in your reviews that are effective. We always want you to support your ratings with statements. Explain why you gave somebody a 3. Explain why you gave them a 4, a 2, a 5. Give us some explanation. So we're going to talk about how to provide constructive comments, and there are different ways to do this dependent upon whether or not you're providing positive feedback or if it's more constructive feedback. But regardless of that, whether it's positive or not, face the facts. Don't personalize, don't generalize, just state the facts. You can support a rating very simply by a statement of a fact that supported something they did or didn't do that explains that rating that you've given. And be specific. Give examples of the behavior that you've observed, the how that led to that success or that difficulty. Of course, use respect. Ask yourself if while you're writing this in their performance appraisal, could you say it to their face? And if not, it's probably best to be left out. Or think about, what if your boss or the CEO read those comments? How would that reflect upon you and your ability as a manager? Frame comments positively when possible. So what I mean here is that this doesn't have to be like when you're praising somebody for doing something. It also means when you're trying to give someone feedback for how to improve. instead of saying, like, he doesn't put any effort into developing customer relationships. Okay, that's, thanks. How about he could be more effective in his role if he spent additional time developing customer relationships? Maybe he could schedule lunches, do some follow-up calls. So provide some guidance. This is a positive reframing of a negative behavior. And of course, I have another little Dilbert illustration here, which I love. This is Alice getting some feedback from her boss. Alice, I'm sending you to a communication class because I've noticed that your words often say one thing while your body language says another. Frankly, it's creepy. And then she says, with a very strange look on her face that looks pretty angry, thank you, I appreciate the useful feedback. So one good thing here is that he's kind of framing this positively and giving her a tool to help her with that issue. Giving her some specific steps she can take. Okay, as you're writing your performance appraisals, let's talk through a couple examples of ways to make those comments from bad to better. In our first example here, Heather lacks commitment. Well, this is not very specific, right? What do we see that makes us think she lacks commitment? Here's a better example. Heather fails to show up to work on time and keep a normal work schedule. That's a specific behavior, and now that we've listed that behavior, we can help her see why she's being perceived as lacking commitment and how she can change that perception. On the bad side, Jennifer takes a lot of initiative. Okay, let's get some details. I mean, that's great, but what are some examples? And so on the good side or the better side, we've got whenever new projects arrive, Jennifer is always at the front asking for additional responsibility. And our last example here, George never listens during group meetings. Okay, try to stay away from never and always, but let's positively reframe this. So instead of just, George, you never listen. How about George seems highly distracted during group meetings, and he could benefit from showing some more interest and participation. So we're giving him an example of what we'd like to see instead, and trying to frame it in a more positive way. So that's comments, and that's sometimes the easiest part. Where it starts to get a little tricky and where it starts to get a little more painful is when we're actually going in and delivering that feedback. Everybody struggles with this. It's not new to you or to me or to anybody who's going through it. So let's talk through some tips on conducting that feedback session. I'm sure that a lot of you have these coming up. So just a kind of a checklist and maybe a way to structure this feedback session is what we have here as an outline. You're going to open the meeting. You're going to review the past goals, review the performance, discuss next steps, review compensation if that's part of your conversation, discuss next year's goals, and then close the meeting. And this is just an example of a structure to help you walk through the feedback session. Okay. As you're preparing to conduct feedback, comment and provide examples of effective and ineffective performance. Now, hopefully you've documented that in your review form, but be prepared to have examples of both sides of the equation. This was the situation, this is what you did, this was the effect of what you did, and this was helpful because. So there's kind of a way to frame that. Clarify your expectations of performance factors. So you might say, given your position and experience, I would expect you to perform this way in these kinds of situations. For example, so here's the situation, this is what you did, this was the effect of your behavior, and then a positive direction. Here's an example of what could have been more effective or what I'd like to see next time. Obviously, consider the style and needs of the employee. Everybody's different, and so if you have a super sensitive employee or somebody who just doesn't hear you very well, try to kind of take that into context, into consideration, and if you think this person's going to need a little bit more direct approach, then go more direct. or if this is the kind of person who you're going to need to be gentle with, do that, but don't lose sight of the message. You can still frame feedback that's a little harder to give, a little bit more constructive in a positive way. But also do more listening than talking, and make this session a two-way discussion. Encourage discussion. A lot of times what I'll find is that if I open it up and I say, well, why did you give yourself a 4 on this particular thing? Or why did you rate yourself a 2 on this? Okay, that makes sense. Now let me explain why I gave you a 2 on this. And a lot of times you'll find that their examples will be quite in line with your own. Of course, be direct and matter of fact. And when I say matter of fact, I mean be factual. Use statements of fact. Use examples. Those are not personal. They're not intended to be emotional. They are the facts. This is what you did. Here's what I'd like to see. Sometimes we have, in our minds, we have some just innate barriers to giving feedback. If you're thinking to yourself, if you want to avoid confrontation, this is the kind of person who, says they don't have time to give their employees feedback, but upon further research, they often admit that they're uncomfortable confronting inappropriate behaviors, and instead they wait and hope the situation will correct itself. So that's a barrier to giving feedback. If this is you, try to step outside your comfort zone a little bit and realize that these items are in your control to improve and to influence. And it's up to you to give that feedback as a manager. Managers are thinking, I don't have time. Some managers will avoid giving feedback because they're concerned that it will get into a long, drawn-out coaching discussion. It will take up too much of their time. In fact, the more feedback managers provide on specific actions, taking just a brief time to explain, the fewer coaching cycles are needed for correcting more serious performance gaps. So if you save up everything until the very last minute, yeah, it might take a while. Try to sprinkle in some feedback throughout the year, and this will be a lot easier. Of course, some people think, well, look, they're doing great. Why do I need to give them feedback? Positive feedback seems totally unnecessary. Some people believe it's unnecessary to tell employees that they're doing the right things because employees should be expected to perform their jobs correctly. Others think that giving positive feedback feels too much like parents who are continuously praising their children. Rejecting that image, they provide little or no positive feedback at all. And the fact is, even adults need recognition in the form of positive feedback to know what they're doing well, to remain engaged on the job, and to maintain a positive relationship with their managers. And often, you could think you're doing something okay, and your manager might say, she's doing it great, but you have no idea. And you might try something else because no one's really told you, listen, you're right on with this, you're doing great. It's definitely not a waste of time. Some people think the employee doesn't care, and they get discouraged about an employee's level of commitment to his or her position. The manager may think that the individual isn't motivated to change their behavior, and so why should I take the time to provide that feedback? And if this truly is the case, there's probably a bigger issue at play here. Performance or morale issues may go beyond an isolated feedback opportunity. In this case, it's incumbent upon the manager to address any performance issues and take reasonable action. If this is really the case, then they probably need to be moving on. Okay, so choosing your words. We've gone through this a little bit already, but instead of saying stop doing this or don't do that, try saying, focus on blah, 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 or work on X, Y, Z. As some examples here, stop making excuses could be turned into focus on finding solutions. Don't be late could be turned into work on arriving on time. Don't make mistakes. How about I need you to increase accuracy? Focus on the future and what you want to see. And of course, be specific. In certain cases, it's necessary to review past examples so that the individual is clear on what they should stop or start doing in order to be successful. But just positively reframe it and focus on the behavior that you would like to see observed. All right, a couple things to avoid. We talked a little bit about this already, but using that all or nothing language. You always do this. You never do that. Be specific, give examples. Focusing on a bad attitude, sometimes it's just all that you can think. It's like, damn it, they just have a bad attitude, and it's hard to really put into specifics what it is that you're picking up on. But try to describe the behaviors that you've seen and what the impact those behaviors have had on coworkers, colleagues, yourself. And also describe what you'd like to see more of. So say, I'd like you to participate more in meetings. I'd like you to smile when you're interacting with customers. Of course, bringing up new issues during the review is a big no-no. Now, I would hope that if there is a big issue that you have been addressing it throughout the year, and we don't want to spring any unexpected surprises on our employees in this session. This should be a recap more than anything. We talked a little bit about different types of feedback, and there's positive feedback and improvement feedback. As I mentioned, improvement feedback is critical. It relates not only to how your employees perform against certain expectations and goals, but may include feedback on behavior issues. Many managers avoid these discussions because they are difficult and uncomfortable. But it's very important. It tells the person what he or she needs to change, describes the impact of the current situation, and is future-oriented. Next time, let's try this. Next time, I'd like to see you do that. As much as you can, you want to ensure that improvement feedback is framed positively and is not a surprise. Positive feedback is usually the easier one to deliver. You're just feeding back information to the employee on what they're doing right. You're letting them know to continue doing what they were doing. And this is imperative to help build our positive relationships with our managers and employees. I think everybody knows that the employee-manager relationship is the #1 factor in terms of how long an employee stays with a company. So building that trust, building that rapport with your employee, and telling them what they're doing well, when they're doing it well, and then if you see some issues, address it head on and frame it positively. And then hopefully, with all of these things in mind, your performance appraisals this year will be a little bit less pain-free. And now we will open up the floor to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Kelly. To all the attendees, I've opened up the Q&A, so feel free to give us any questions you have, and I will submit them as they come in. The first question we have is, Kelly, since you are a performance appraisal expert, how often would you recommend that people do performance appraisals, or when, and what's a good cycle there?
Well, I always, minimum is annual. A little better is to do a mid-year and an annual. Especially if you have goals, because I find that 12 months later, you've totally forgotten what you set out for yourself to do at the beginning of the year. So if you have that mid-year check-in, you can find out if you're on track, does anything need to be adjusted, and you can reevaluate for the second half of the year, and also keep those things that you set out to do front of mind. Even better might be quarterly. Now that might be too much for some cultures, but quarterly performance appraisals can be short and sweet, and it's just a way to formalize that feedback. And it doesn't have to include 50 questions. It doesn't have to include a full rating scale. It's just a way to formalize and document that you are having conversations with your direct reports and you're continuing to develop them and provide them with ongoing feedback.
Great. And we just have one additional question, which is if we will be sending out a copy of the presentation, which we will. And for all of you that registered and attended. We will be sending out not only the slides, but a recording of the entire presentation. And actually, some more questions just flooded in. So let's see. How would you go about helping managers see the value of performance appraisals if the company ownership does not support the concept?
Yeah, I understand that one. It's a tricky situation because ideally, this gets rolled out with the highest participation, and if executives and if the leadership are promoting it. So a couple different ways that you can help leadership to see the value is you can talk through the benefits of employee engagement. Employee engagement in terms of goal setting, employee engagement in terms of their relationship with their manager. There are a lot of studies and articles out there that you can pull for reference. But you want to lower turnover, you want to lower turnover, you want to lower your employee dissatisfaction, you want to increase employee engagement. You will read again and again that feedback is a huge part in keeping those things on task. People want feedback. They want it. Even the bad feedback, they want it. And if you can get your workforce to be engaged and to be committed and to be held accountable, and also develop that manager-employee relationship, and make that a point of a trusting relationship, all of those things will not only increase your longevity of your staff, but will certainly increase your productivity. And you can find article and article upon article that will say the same thing, and that all comes back to feedback.
Okay, and then we have one attendee who said that they currently do a monthly one-on-one and a formal appraisal annually. But I believe the question is, how do you feel about connecting compensation to performance appraisals?
Me personally, I feel that it's important. I think there's got to be some incentive to help your employees see that what they're contributing and not only the goals that they're achieving, but also the skills and traits that they're developing has a financial outcome. And I think there's no better way than to increase engagement and to increase participation in performance appraisals than to tie it with some sort of incentive or merit increase.
And then here's another good one. How do you handle, from an HR standpoint, when the employee's self-assessment is starkly different from the manager's assessment? For example, one has 4s and 5s and the other has 1s and 2s.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. One of the nice things about the TalentQuest performance appraisal system is that you can view those employees' ratings and responses ahead of time, so you can kind of think through how you expect that there's a disconnect, so you're preparing for that. And then you can think through each one of those examples and how you're going to explain the rating difference. So in a recent example of my own personal one, I rated somebody a 2 and they rated themselves a 4. And so I knew that ahead of time that there was going to be a disconnect. And I said, I see that there's a disconnect here on this particular item. Tell me why you think you're a 4. And he gave some good examples, and I said, okay, I think that's great. Here are some of the things that, this is why I gave you a 2. And I gave specific examples of behaviors and actions that, that supported my rating of a 2. And when I listed out those facts and those examples, in the end he said, yeah, yeah, you're right. Not that that's always going to go that well, but I do think that the more you're prepared, the more you know what you're going to get pushback on, and the more you're prepared to handle it with specific examples, the easier that conversation will go.
So that's, I guess that's more between the manager and the employee themselves, but what about the situation?
The vice versa?
Well, when you're the HR person and you've got, they might not agree on what it is. How do you navigate that? Just take into account all of the facts from both sides. And
so you're reviewing or approving an appraisal, and you see big disconnects. Yeah, and so from kind of that third-party perspective, I think it's important to sit down and see both sides of the story and try to find out what is the disconnect. And I want the facts. I want the examples. I want the behaviors. Let's see, you know, when we put this all out there on paper, what does this really look like? Maybe we're not as far off as we think, but our perception of what we're actually rating is a little different, or our perception of what a 3 really means is different than his, you know, her perception of what a 3 is different than his perception of a 3. So a lot of times that can be combated just by reviewing the rating scale and the rating scale definitions. So let's all get on the same page about what does it mean to be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. And then let's take a look at the facts, let's look at the behaviors, and see if we can come to a common ground.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for your time this afternoon and for everyone who joined us in attendance. And again, we will be sending you all a copy of this webinar, a recording, as well as the slides if you're interested. And please look for our next invitation for next month's webinar, and we hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.